Hey there, everybody. I've just got one question for you all tonight. Have you ever wanted to camp, but you can't? You're allergic to nature and you don't have a tent. Well, I've got good news. You can camp while in bed in a virtual space we'll plug into your head. It's Least Haunted Campfire Club. Yes, the Least Haunted Campfire Club. Give us the keys, we'll open our scary door. Sight, sound, and even taste if you make yourself a s'more. This is the new reality the Least Haunted has you. Let's tell ghost stories around some digital plasma.
The Shadow Over Loveland. The man cursed the weak headlights of his nearly 20-year-old 1938 Dodge sedan as he drove through the dark Ohio night. He cursed the merchandise that filled the back of the car. He had removed the rear seat to allow for even more space in which to stack the boxes of nearly identical books. Even the trunk had been so stuffed in such a way to only spare enough space for his small leather suitcase. It was second-hand and third and fourth-hand as well, so well traveled through time and space that the leather at the corners had worn away to reveal the thin poplar wood underneath. He cursed his old high school friend Jerry, who had said to him one day, "College is for chumps. The real ticket out of this town is in sales." And Jerry had been right. Well, sort of. It was indeed a ticket out of that no-horse town, but what he had since learned was that it was a ticket for a never-ending trip. It was hard to earn enough to stop moving for long when you were selling something that no one would ever want or need. Selling encyclopedias door to door sounded like a good idea at the time. Who wouldn't want the world's information right at their fingertips? Everything under God's golden sun collected right there in faux leather-bound books. And it would have worked too, had these been something like the Encyclopedia Britannica. Instead, these were the Encyclopedia Brad Danica. Brad Danica was a farmer from Mule's Kick, Arkansas, a small town famous for being the place where a once famous Hollywood starlet had been kicked in the head by a mule as a child. It was the mule kick that had given her the trademark lopsided blank gaze that in an era before sound and cinema was enough to guarantee a place in the pantheon of silver screen deities. And once she had risen to fame, the town had decided to change its name to Mule's Kick in commemoration of this claim to fame. And besides, no one much cared for the old name of Skunk Swamp. Brad Danica had been part of the name change effort. He was a farmer, but if anyone had asked him of what, he would say, "I am a farmer of ideas." The fact that he said this while standing beneath a sign that said Danica's Hog Farm would be something that he would willfully ignore. And he really did have a knack for ideas. They couldn't really be called good ideas, or bad ideas for that matter, but they were ideas, and that fact could not be ignored. He was the one who had proposed the name change for the town as a means to drum up something he called tourism. He had also proposed that the town build the world's largest mule as another way to advertise itself. The fact that no paved road or major highway ran anywhere close to Mule's Kick was just a minor inconvenience as far as Brad Danica was concerned. One day, Brad Danica had the brilliant idea of selling information. He had had the idea while perusing the town's small library for information on how to convert hog manure into building materials for the aforementioned giant mule statue project. This was how he found the badly battered, out-of-date, and more importantly, incomplete Encyclopedia Britannica. In the fertile soil of Brad's mind, a fresh crop of ideas began to germinate and to sprout. The Encyclopedia Brad Danica wasn't just a copy of the Encyclopedia Britannica. It was an improved version. Although the word improved was only a matter of opinion. The Mule's Kick Public Library, based out of the basement of the Widow Johnson, had an incomplete copy of the encyclopedia. It was missing volumes, most notably the letters I, P, and X, but Brad solved that problem by just making up those whole cloth or by directly copying those sections from the Webster's Dictionary. Within 5 years, Brad Danica found himself the king at the top of his own triangle-shaped marketing thing. Now, in the year 1955, our salesman found himself on the never-ending journey of trying to sell knockoff encyclopedias to unsuspecting housewives and schoolmarms. A Sisyphean task, for once he had managed to offload even the smallest amount of merchandise, it would be replaced with more poorly printed, misspelled, and incorrect Encyclopedia Brad Danicas. Cursing the weakness of his headlights once again, the salesman tried to focus on the road. He was trying to get to Cincinnati. He had it on good authority that the housewives of the Queen City would be eager to purchase an encyclopedia. Why this would be the case, he had no clue, but a tip was a tip, even if it did come directly from the top of the triangle-shaped marketing thingy. Somewhere along the way, however, he had gotten turned around, or at the very least turned halfway, and now found himself driving down a dark 2-lane country road somewhere in the hinterlands of Cincinnati. He estimated it to be sometime around 3 a.m., and as far as he could tell, he was getting nowhere nearer Cincinnati. Mile after mile of darkened roadway and passing shadows were all that there was to assure him that he was actually moving, that and the dropping needle of his fuel gauge. A small glimmer of hope appeared for him in the distance, as he could see the faint glow of a street lamp ahead. Within a minute, he slowed down to read the sign that the light illuminated. Welcome to Loveland, Ohio. Population 2,149. Incorporated 1876. Loveland. Okay, so now he had a name. He drove slowly through the darkened and sleeping town. It seemed that the light at the town's entrance was the only one on at this hour. He took note of the dark storefronts and windows of the modest main street, brick buildings and older wood shingled businesses. He thought to himself that had it been daytime, he could possibly find a few people in Loveland who would have been eager to own the knowledge of the world conveniently bound in the 22 volumes of the Encyclopedia Brad Danica. It was a blink and you miss it town, and as road weariness and sleep deprivation had lengthened the time of his blinks, he soon found himself apparently on the other side of town. The reflection of moonlight off to his right alerted him to the presence of a small river, which he guessed to be the Little Miami River. He had seen it earlier in the day on the map as he had tried to plan his travel route. Its presence, even in the darkened night, gave him hope that he was indeed traveling in the right direction. As the road swept around a bend to accommodate an oxbow in the river's course, it approached a small, narrow bridge. That's when he saw them. His first thought was that they were children on account of their short stature, perhaps 3 to 4 feet tall. But that couldn't be right. What would kids be doing out on a country road on the outskirts of a town at 3 in the morning? He rolled the old Dodge to a stop. Not that he could have kept driving anyways, as the 3 stooped figures were standing in the middle of the road and bridge. Miraculously, the figures did not seem to notice him, or at least did not care. The salesman took the time to really look at what he was seeing in the half moonlight and the dim headlights. The 3 figures were small, and that explained why his road-dumb mind had automatically dropped children into the empty spot created by his confusion. But now that he really looked, they more resembled old men, but even that wasn't right. With a mixture of disgust and slight embarrassment, he realized that they did not seem to be wearing clothes. But even that was soon replaced with more confusion, as their skin was not right either. It reflected what little light there was in a rubbery, greasy way, brown-green and dappled. Then slowly, with growing horror, he began to notice the word jumping up and down in his mind. It was a word that could be found in the Encyclopedia Brad Danica under F, between Freemasonry, which the encyclopedia described as, quote, any bit of suitable building stone that one finds on the side of the road, or at any unattended construction site, and frou-frou, which was, quote, any fancy thing that comes from the city or costs more than $5. The word that he was looking for was frog. That's what they were. Frogs. There were 3 to 4 foot tall, upright walking frogmen in the middle of the road, and they appeared to be having a casual conversation, although he could not hear them. They stood there in the headlights, ignoring him and acting as carefree as if they were little old ladies discussing the events of last Sunday's bingo game. For how long, he could not later say, but he was sure it could not have been more than 5 minutes. the frogmen stood there. Their large, bulbous eyes luminous but unblinking. Suddenly, the tallest of the three seemed to notice the rumbling Dodge sedan idling in the lane. 3 sets of golden, glowing eyes turned and met with the frightened eyes of the salesman. The tall one raised up its right webbed hand, in which it was clutching a silver cylindrical object. Wand, the salesman thought, but he wasn't sure why. It pointed the object in its direction, and it began to emit a multitude of many-colored sparks, which lit up the countryside briefly and brightly. The salesman found himself momentarily blinded, as if by a lightning strike, but as the light faded and his vision returned, he could just make out the huddled shapes leap off the side of the bridge and presumably into the water below. He wasn't going to stick around to find out. He quickly put the car into gear and slammed his foot to the accelerator. If there were any other frogmen standing on the side of the road, he wasn't sticking around to find out. Later, as the sun began to rise and cover the countryside with its reassuring golden light, he pulled into the parking lot of a roadside diner. He could see the modest skyline of 1950s Cincinnati on the horizon. Trying not to think about the amphibious horror he had seen a few hours before, he entered and ordered a cup of thick coffee and some greasy eggs and burnt toast. He didn't actually order that, but it's what came, and he ate it diligently, paid his tab, and asked the waitress, "Excuse me, do you have a trash bin around here?" "Out back," she said. "You need to throw something away?" she asked. "Only everything," he answered with a weird look on his face. The waitress left it at that. She didn't get paid enough, and it was too early in the morning to deal with that. The ex-salesman pulled his now empty 1938 Dodge sedan back onto the open road and looked briefly at all the Encyclopedia Brad Danicas now overflowing the diner's dumpster. All of the information in the world behind him, and all of the world before him. He wondered where he could go, where he would never see a frog again.
It was a scorching hot afternoon in the ripe heart of summer when I stumbled across the first one. I'd been following a half-dissolved deer trail, traversing a steep open hillside, when it caught my eye. A small, yet clearly handmade pillar of rocks, stacked like a small sentry tower emerging from the undergrowth. I wondered at it, curiously, when a second, similar shape, not 30 yards away, captured my interest. Remnants of some long-forgotten pathway, like beacons of some long-ago pilgrimage. I felt my legs pulling me steadily onward, as yet another miniature citadel materialized from the wild growth. Further onward, traversing through the foliage, as if into a painting. Just ahead, a sprawling live oak stood, its great brawny limbs casting a wide canopy of shade, under which I braced myself, panting softly in the direct heat. It was then I glimpsed the decayed remnants of a once robust and handsome plaque, half absorbed into the proud oak, engraved with the letters STONERID CHAP. The missing remnants, lost seemingly ages ago. How unusual, I thought, that anything man-made would be so far out here. Just at that moment, yet another stone tower emerged just ahead from the thickets. I pushed on, trolloping through the foliage, drawn further with the discovery of each new relic. Each step forward, the foliage seemed to densen, and my progress became more labored. Soon I found myself deep in a tangled thicket, quite unable to proceed, and feeling quite foolish for bushwhacking myself into such a mess. Feeling overcome, I perched myself on a rocky outcropping, jutting above the brush. It was only after I was seated for another winded break against the stone surface that I discovered it too had been constructed by human hands, the remnants of a long-forgotten wall. Once more, my curiosity had been ignited, and I knew I must press on. Presently, threading through the heavy growth, I came upon a clearing nestled against the shadow of a great looming rock. There were great stones scattered across the glade like marbles. As my eyes adjusted, I saw they belonged to a great fallen turret, erected roughly against the jagged cliff face, its impressive hand-hewn curvature rising with the mountainside. My heartbeat jumped. A castle? Could it be? How very odd, I thought. Had I passed through some ancient portal in time? What was this medieval dwelling doing here? Through the rubble and greenery, I spied a collapsing threshold, within which a hand-carved, heavy wooden door was lodged, splintering into kindling. Beyond it, a dark passage beckoned ominously. Am I a fool to take one more step? I thought to myself. Yet, tales are not born of those who have turned back. With a chilling courage, I continued on. Cautiously, I skirted the great courtyard, making my way towards the great door. Above me, tall thin windows with ornate stained glass winked down solemnly, as if squinting in the blinding midday sun. I had reached the door and found, nestled among the brambles, chiseled aspen leaves dancing at the rough-hewn corners and across the wide arching gable. Again, I could feel the great surge of wanderlust passing through me like a wave to the heart of the ruin. Bending low, I continued to gently creep along the passage, using each placed stone along the corridor wall as a guide. It was eerily still and quite dark. The air was thick and musty, like manky old carpet left out in the rain. A moment later, the passageway opened its mouth to a great rounded dining hall. As my eyes changed, I began to make out the jagged stone ceiling that constructed more than half of the roof. This room had been carved into the side of the mountain, I marveled. The rusted iron skeleton of a Viking-like chandelier hung lopsided, not far from where I rest on my haunches, under which lay the battered rubble of a grand feast table. Faint glimmers of filtered light trickled in through portions of the decrepit roofing, catching glints of colored tile mosaic. Near a great chasm, I mused, must be the fireplace. Tentatively, I withdrew my cell phone for a flashlight and slid the smooth screen button to on. The beam of the artificial light shot into the rafters, falling on a mass of tiny, wriggling bodies quivering in the blackness. My heart leapt from my stomach into my throat upon the realization I was engulfed by thousands of squirming bats in tight clusters all around me. Instantly, I snuffed out my light and listened in terror. A single bat had dislodged from the horde and was darting around the cavernous room, shooting great flashes of shadows as it passed through the straggling sunbeams, its leathery wings beats, pushing bursts of air and small whooshing sounds above me. I waited silently, holding my breath. Soon, it had rejoined the others, and they gingerly crept back through the passage from which I had entered. Back in the blistering sun, I could make out a pathway defined by a wide stone arch on the adjacent side of the courtyard. I pressed on further across the fallen rubble towards it, my eyes fiercely sharp for snake coils and other hidden threats lying in wait. I grazed my fingertips lightly over the curious patterns inlaid into the towering walls of the archway. They were worn smooth from the years of weathering in the unforgiving landscape. A chill brushed over my skin, and I shuddered from the suddenness. A steady, cool draft of wet and still air caressed my damp arms and face. As I carefully picked my way around the sharp turn against a large boulder, the trail suddenly cut hard, not into the mountainside, but down below it. It was surely the largest natural cave mouth I had ever seen, its gaping jaws salivating to swallow me whole. I stood at the very top, curling my toes over the top step. The draft was blowing so strong I could feel my hair tickling my neck and my sweat drying to my skin. It was a cold and ominous place, and I had left as soon as I had come. The embankment continued above me, with small shelves of rock in staggered layers, reaching to the ridgeline of the mountainside. This is likely the clearest passage through the top, I queried inside. Certainly beats bushwhacking painstakingly each step. I began to scale the precipice. Who was it, I wondered, who had quarried this cliff face and erected this magnificent, towering structure across hundreds of burning days, who had likely traveled over each stone I now tread hundreds or even thousands of times. As I crested the ridge, I felt the warm comfort being in the wide open air and the intensity of the noonday sun. Yet, a prickling cold hung beneath my skin, growing with each step, like the feeling of unseen eyes watching me. From where I stood, I could see the landscape sprawling before me below. The courtyard with the scattered debris of stone and burned timbers, the archway to the cave, and on the perimeter, the faint trail I had beat from the wilds, a small stone marker just visible above the wild raspberries. As if a large animal was approaching me from behind, I felt a presence upon my neck. I turned abruptly, and there it was. Peering from within the underbrush, not 30 yards from where I stood. The chapel. A sort of haunting excitement gripped my nerves. It continued to stare at me in mystic reverence, with the same tall, thin windows squinting from the shadow. I cinched my courage and set about traversing the open knoll towards the entrance. The yellow grass was thick and knee-high through this small section, and easy passing. I was nearly there now. Suddenly, a creature burst with a flurry from the thatch just ahead of me and brushed a wingtip like a paintbrush across my cheek. I let out a startled whelp as I watched a mountain quail flutter past in a frantic blur. Just a quail, I said to myself out loud, gathering my wits. I could feel my blood pumping through my body and the icy stream of adrenaline leaking in. I had reached the entrance now and leaned inquisitively against the pleasant cold stones. Another towering stone arch enveloping two magnificent slab oak doors, meeting like a round point shovel at the crest. The same engraved aspen leaves, like a creeping vine along its edges, and a stout blacksmithed handle with a twisting grip, fastened the middle boldly with deep-set carriage bolts. The latch released the great twin doors with more ease than I expected. The hinge gave a mild groan as I slipped within. It was very dark in that room, and I blinked for several moments before growing accustomed. The room was dry and smelled of sawdust and old book pages. The only light was cast from a small circular window at the top of the far wall. It cast a pale glow on a dozen hewn oak pews arranged in rows on each side of the redwood plank walls. All was still, yet the air hung in suspense like a cloud moments before conducting an electrical search. Softly as cat's paws, I crossed the vacant floor, leaving articulated footprints in the thick dust behind me. With each step, I could feel the thunderclouds rolling. I had reached the foot of the podium. My boot toes pressed against the base of the step. I gently propelled my weight to the new elevation. The vibrating charge in the air made my hair stand on end. Moments from the far wall, I pressed ever more onward into the ungathering darkness. A rich, deep stain soaked into a vague pattern, a symbol, a red-brown spiral shape, dripping loosely and devouring itself. Some faraway thought chimed in my mind. Blood. My foot meets a small obstruction in the floor, a round section of rebar penetrating from the floor. A handle to a door. As if in slow motion, I feel my body reach down for the small object. My fingertips meet the ribbed steel. A voice bellows with a ringing clarity, seemingly shaking the very rafters of the chapel. Few have seen, none have unseen. It wasn't until I had reached the far ridge, well beyond the valley where the chapel stood, when I finally collapsed in exhaustion. My cotton long sleeve was dripping from the cold sweat coursing through me. I lay in the safety of the woven grasses, with the sound of my brain coursing and my legs still running far from me. I leaned my back against the crook of the oak trunk and gazed out upon the final rays of evening sunlight blowing its last kiss to the day. On the far ridge from where I rest, I could just make out the faint silhouette of the first stone marker I encountered, capturing the golden beams like a lantern. It had all happened, I knew. It was all real. I cast onward, away from the castle, and into the falling night. The Stone Ridge Chapel by Blue Roan.
It's the least haunted campfire club. The least haunted campfire club. Oh, it's the least haunted campfire club. Picture